In 1348, in a silent stone-walled chamber just outside Florence, a nun lay pinned beneath the flickering light of a dozen beeswax candles. Her name was Sister Caterina Dewey, and for 19 unbroken hours she did not pray. She screamed, not because she was dying, but because surgeons were removing her skeleton piece by piece while she remained fully conscious. And the most disturbing truth is this: she paid them to do it. The witnesses who stood around her weren't executioners. They were learned men, physicians, theologians, and scholars. Each was convinced they were watching an act of holy purification. Across her trembling body they mapped the human form as if it were a living scripture. Every incision, every exposed nerve, every bone lifted from her flesh was recorded with clinical devotion. But the horror unfolding in that chamber did not begin with Caterina. It began with the world collapsing outside its walls. Europe was choking under the Black Death. Corpses filled the streets faster than they could be buried. And as millions died, medicine faced a crisis no surgeon could solve. The Catholic Church had forbidden dissection of the dead. To cut open a corpse was to risk excommunication, to damn one's soul for eternity. So a new, monstrous doctrine emerged quietly in the shadows. If the dead could not be studied, study the living. In the chaos of plague-stricken Florence, this idea found fertile ground inside a circle of devout believers who saw physical agony as a ladder to salvation. They called themselves the Seekers of Sacred Agony, and Sister Caterina, a respected woman of faith, would become their masterpiece and their ruin. This wasn't torture. It was anatomia viva, living anatomy. It was a method designed to extract knowledge the Church had forbidden, carried out on a breathing, conscious human being whose suffering they interpreted as a divine offering. Get ready, because what happened next defies every instinct of human survival. The technique was brutally simple and scientifically precise. Tourniquets were tightened until the limbs blanched white, cutting off blood flow but not sensation. Incisions were carved along the fingers, wrists, and arms with scalpels that had been blessed by priests. Bones were removed one by one, the surgeons carefully cauterizing the exposed vessels with red-hot irons to stop the bleeding. Honey and wine were packed into the gaping wounds to prevent infection. It was medieval surgery, pushed past its absolute limit, performed without opium, without wine for the patient, without even the mercy of unconsciousness. To the men standing over her, none of this was cruelty. It was revelation. Outside the monastery, the Black Death was burning through Europe. Physicians were desperate. Plague treatments were failing, and every missing piece of medical knowledge translated directly into lives lost. But with the Catholic Church condemning post-mortem dissection, scholars were trapped in ignorance. Anatomia viva became the loophole, a forbidden practice hidden behind the veil of religious devotion. Caterina, convinced that enduring unimaginable pain would carry her soul directly into heaven, offered herself as the perfect subject. Her brother, the surgeon Mondino de Luzzi, hesitated at first, but scientific ambition and the crushing pressure from the faithful won over his brotherly love. Together, they would create a procedure that medical students would whisper about for centuries. Mondino held the knife, but it was Caterina's fanaticism that guided the blade. She believed she was becoming a saint. He believed he was becoming a god of medicine. Protocol 7 began at dawn. Within the first hour, her distress was labeled baseline. Within 3 hours, she was begging. Every plea was categorized, timed, and measured. Her suffering became a chart. By hour 14, the attendant nuns could hear her from down the corridor, even through the heavy oak doors. One wrote in her diary that she prayed in the chapel afterward, ashamed she could not stop it. A young apprentice questioned the cruelty, but the lead doctor answered humanitarianism doesn't advance science. only truth does. Day 2. Her words began collapsing into broken fragments. Clinical notes reduced it to non-lexical vocalizations. She was losing language but not consciousness. That was the goal. They needed her awake to track nerve responses. Day 3. A nun attempted to administer a sponge soaked in poppy tears, a primitive anesthetic, in secret. She was caught and expelled from the order. On her way out, she passed the patient's family in the waiting room. She told them their daughter was responding to the divine treatment. Behind the door, Katerina had been screaming for 60 hours. Day 4. The nuns arriving for the shift change believed she had died. Her body barely moved. Then they heard a faint, inhuman sound, the last remnants of a voice crushed by endurance. Her eyes remained open. She was aware trapped in a prison of silence and pain. The lead researcher was thrilled. He noted the moment language failed as unprecedented. He ordered the experiment extended. This wasn't just anatomy anymore. It was a study in the breaking point of the human soul. 3 nuns filed formal complaints with the bishop. The church dismissed them. The protocol was approved. Their job was to observe and document one by one. The nuns quit, but not before they were forced to continue the procedure's tests to verify pain response, which meant inflicting more stimuli on a woman who could no longer speak. Day 5. She stopped making any sound at all. Physicians switched to physical tests, reflex blood pressure spikes, eye tracking. Her eyes eventually stopped following movement, staring blankly at the ceiling as if looking into a world no one else could see. Day 6. The first surgeon walked out, breaking his contract with the Brotherhood. Day 7, the second followed. Day 8. The last assistant broke down when told the experiment would be prolonged for unique post-verbal opportunities. Her family 30 feet away in the guest quarters was told she needed rest. Near the end of the week, her father demanded to see her. The monastery sedated her for the first time, not to relieve suffering, but to hide it. He saw his daughter unconscious and believed the doctor's reassurances that she was in a holy trance. Once he left, they reversed the sedation and continued. Day 9. Her vital signs began to falter. Only then did Mondino recommend ending the procedure to prevent permanent damage, as though 9 days of structured agony had not already done that. But the damage went far deeper than bone and muscle. The moment the experiment ended, they finally administered morphine because the data collection phase was complete. For 6 more days, they observed how her mind tried to crawl back from the edge. How long until she spoke would she remember? Could the psyche reassemble after prolonged torture? Without sedation, a visiting scholar wrote that she showed signs consistent with demonic possession, but in reality her mind had simply shattered into 1,000 pieces. When she was finally released from the table, the paperwork called it experimental therapeutic intervention. The family never learned the truth during her life. Katerina lived 21 more years. She never fully recovered. Every shadow haunted her. The research team, meanwhile, celebrated the results. They had mapped the nervous system in a way no one else ever had. But at what cost? For 6 more years, Sister Katerina remained alive, if survival is the right word, with no arms, no legs, and no bones in her limbs. She lived suspended in a specially constructed wooden frame that held her upright like a fragile relic. She could no longer speak. The stress and screaming had permanently damaged her jaw and vocal cords. But she could blink. And with that single motion, she answered the questions of the faithful who lined up to see her. The monastery displayed her as a living miracle. Pilgrims paid for a glimpse of the boneless saint. Clerics whispered about her endurance. Students came to study her condition. No one saw the woman. They only saw the myth they had created around her. The frame that held her still exists today in a private collection in Florence, mislabeled as a medieval disability support device. Its true purpose is absent from the plaque intentionally. History tries to hide its monsters. Mondino's story continued far from Europe. Forced into exile by a rival faction within the church, he crossed into Constantinople and eventually settled in Cairo. There, his surviving notes became the backbone of future surgical techniques that would eventually find their way back into Europe generations later. But the legacy that mattered most came in 1352. Pope Clement VI, horrified by the growing cult around Caterina and the chaos that followed the aborted procedure, issued a sweeping ban. Anatomia viva was declared a violation of divine law, and all forms of dissection without consent were outlawed. Though the church never admitted it openly, the ban was written because of one woman. Her agony became the first foundation stone of modern medical ethics. Today, every consent form you sign before surgery echoes her legacy. Every right you have to stop a procedure, to withdraw permission, to understand the risks, it all began with the moment Caterina whispered, "I want to live." We take these rights for granted, but they were bought with blood. They were paid for by a woman who was disassembled while she watched. And yet a darker truth survives in Mondino's final writings. Caterina had believed that pain would free her soul from the prison of her body. She thought she would transcend the flesh. But her reactions during nerve dissection revealed something else. Something neither one of them expected. Her consciousness, her sensations, her very sense of self, all followed the pathways of flesh and nerve. There was no separation. There was no divine transcendence. There was only physiology. When the nerve was cut, the feeling stopped. When the brain was overwhelmed, the self disappeared. She sought to prove she was more than her body, but she proved only that we are nothing without it. It was a terrifying realization for a woman of faith. The soul is tethered to the meat. Every time you hear a surgeon explain a procedure, every time you initial beside a line labeled informed consent, you are living in the shadow of Sister Caterina Dewey. Her scream echoed through the centuries to protect you today. But her story forces us to ask a question that makes us uncomfortable. We look back at them as barbarians, but are we so different we still sacrifice the few for the benefit of the many? We still push the boundaries of ethics in the name of progress. The tools have changed, but the ambition remains the same. If you had been in that cathedral surrounded by authority, scripture, and the promise of knowledge, would you have stopped them, or would you have watched, convinced it was for the greater good? If this story of the dark origins of medicine chilled you to the bone, make sure to subscribe. We dig up the history they tried to bury. Until next time, remember that knowledge often has a body count.